Hi everyone, it's Vanessa with the Bridgewater Public Library, and this indoor gardening program I wanted to start off a little differently because it's April, the month of April, which is also National Poetry Month, and spring has started. So I thought it would be really kind of fitting to read a poem by Emily Dickinson, a well-known American poet and Massachusetts native. You may or may not know that she was a big gardener and liked to study flowers and plants. So I'll read one of her poems. Perhaps you'd like to buy a flower, but I would never sell. If you'd like to borrow until the daffodil unties her yellow bonnet beneath the village door, until the bees from clover rose their hawk and sherry draw, why I will lend until just then, but not an hour more. I'm an Emily Dickinson fan. I think it's really neat to think that during a time when women were not encouraged to really study science, she was going to school and learning botany. Her mom also kind of fostered her love for gardening by teaching her about gardening, and her father built her a conservatory at the home that she grew up in and stayed in her whole life, and that's where she would keep her plants and flowers that she was studying. And another fun fact was that a common way back then for women to study flowers and plants is they would press flowers. That's actually why I brought out my little pressed flower container here, in honor of that, because even though it was probably seen as more of an artistic expression, it was still a way for women to be collecting and discovering and identifying flowers. And she actually created a 66-page book, which was her herbarium, which is just a receptacle for pressed flowers. Hers was a book. And you can still see that today. If you go in person, or if you want to do a Google search for Harvard Houghton Library, you can actually see a digital copy scan of her pressed flowers herbarium. It's pretty amazing. You can see all of her handwriting of the names of the flowers. And another fun fact is that a good amount of her poetry talks about flowers, and she would often write letters to friends and family, and she would include in the letters a pressed flower, which I think is a really cool gesture. So anyways, for National Poetry Month, also make sure you check out a lot of what the library is offering. Check out our website. A lot of my coworkers are doing some really fun things for National Poetry Month. So be on the lookout on our YouTube and Facebook page, and you can find everything listed on our website. Okay, so last indoor gardening program I talked about succulents, and today I wanted to talk to you about kind of a particular species of succulent, and that is aloe is a group of succulents that within that have many varieties, many species. I think I've read that there's 400 species with various hybrids, cultivars. So they can very much vary in color, and some can be more blue. This one that I borrowed from a friend is more green, but it can also, a lot of them have more spots, more stripes. I'll do a close-up of this one. You can see has some spots and stripes and those little sharp prickles that aren't too sharp, but on some aloe, the little prickles that are on the sides here can be very sharp, depending. Those prickles are usually to protect the plant from things that like to feed on plants. So I borrowed this from a friend. It's very common. This is the Aloe Vera species. And so that is of the genus Aloe. And you can break off a leaf, you've probably heard, or cut with a clean pair of shears or scissors, or just break off a piece. And for medicinal purposes, this plant you can use for medicinal purposes. It has a sap, or you could call it like a gel, that you can put on cuts and burns and, a whole host of things. That's why it's commonly in lotions and different things. So I thought it would be a really cool succulent to get more in depth about, because it's such a popular, common one. And it's a fun one that you could keep even in your kitchen, so that if quickly you got a little cut or burn, you could just and use some of the sap inside. But to get into a little bit about the care of it, so like all succulents, it's really good to have a pot that has good drainage, so a good drainage hole, like I've showed you guys before in the last video. The best pot for an aloe is terracotta, which, this is a tiny terracotta pot, but these are breathable, more porous, and that's better than a, even though this isn't a plastic pot, which is fine. You just have to remember that plastic or glazed pots hold more moisture, more water. So when you're watering, you do have to be careful. You do want to make sure to pop off the base so that the water is coming out of the drainage holes. Because these really like to be in well-draining soil and to dry out in between waterings, like all succulents. So for soil, the best bet would be probably a gritty mix, like the bonsai, or you can make your own of perlite, lava rock, chunks of bark, all three of that, with maybe a little bit of your standard cactus succulent soil. All of that you can find at garden supply places, stores. But the grittier the better. These can grow outdoors and indoors, and when they're outdoors in their natural environment, a lot of times they are growing in like a rockier soil, desert-like soil. But there's such a wide range of aloe that they are found in kind of a variety of climates. So let's see, what else can I say about the pot? They do like to be actually more pot bound. So that means like you can let the roots kind of grow a lot in the pot. They don't actually like to be repotted very frequently, so maybe once a year, maybe once every year and a half, 2 years. So that's an interesting thing to note, because they can grow very quickly and big. And if you do repot, you want to wait a week before watering, so just let it get used to the new pot, the new soil. That's kind of always a good rule of thumb, I feel, with succulents. For light, they really like bright light, so bright, direct light. So a western, a southern window, southern eastern window would work too. And they can get sunburned, so morning, afternoon light is probably the best, but in summer, if it's like really, really hot coming through a glass window, you may want to pull it back a little bit from the window, because they can get sunburned. You would know that if you see that it's turning yellow. And for watering, they do, like I said, like to be dried out in between completely. So with succulents, kind of what it's referred to with watering is you want to water deeply but infrequently. So when you water, you want to make sure it's all getting watered, but let it all pour out and then stop. They're drought tolerant, so they go with a bit of neglect, meaning you don't have to water this once a week. You could probably get away with it, depending on your climate where you live, maybe every 2 weeks or maybe every 3. You just have to kind of see. And a thing that I thought is really interesting that I would not have guessed is that this is actually dormant in summer. It's not growing in summer. It's actually a winter growing plant, which I don't know why I wouldn't have thought of that. So in the summer, you also want to be careful not to overwater it. It's still going to need water, but just don't overwater it. You don't want it to rot. Its growing season is winter, spring, fall. And that's actually similar to kalanchoe, which I have a few different varieties here, which is one of my other favorites. So let's see, what else can I say? For temperature, you know, there's the standard temperature of like 50 to 80 degrees. They do great. But like I said, they can be outdoors, so it depends on where you are. Some aloes that grow outdoors, depending on the type, they can tolerate a teeny bit of frost in some climates, so you would just have to see, or, you know, if it was getting to be too cold or frosty, you could always cover your outdoor aloe with a cloth. I've heard that the way you know if it was to get frostbite is if it starts to turn black. That's frostbite. And if it is in the summer, sometimes it also needs shade, whether under other plants or a cloth. And if it was to get sunburned, again, it's going to turn yellow and, yeah, not look so good. Some other things, too, to note about watering is if you're underwatering, they're going to get really thin leaves that yellow. If you're overwatering, you're going to get squishy leaves that sometimes bend over the pot. So I think that might be happening a teeny bit with this one because of this here, but overall, this looks really good. So let's see, propagation. These will often grow pups or babies off of the mother plant, and you can, once they're about medium size, a decent size, you can pull them off, separate them, but you want to keep the stalk and the roots, as much of the roots as possible. And you'd want to, before repotting, leave it out for a little bit so that it can dry out, kind of callus over, which I mentioned in my last video. It's so that the ends of the succulent just kind of form like a callus and dry out. Then put it in soil in a sunny spot, but still wait about a week to start watering a freshly repotted pup or baby. Let's see. So even though you can use these for medicinal purposes, like on your skin topically, they can be toxic if you ingest it, or if your kids or pets were to do that. So be mindful of that. And let's see, some other facts about aloe that you may find interesting. So these leaves are very thick and fleshy, and like a lot of succulents, it's drought tolerant because it is storing water in its leaves, and when it's outdoors, it can get really big. It can even almost get tree-like. They can get at the bottom these brown, kind of look dead-looking leaves, but also it's like a stalk. And that's also to protect the plant, similar to the prickles. It's normal for that to happen. You may even see that happen with your indoor aloe plants. If they're growing like off the side, they may start developing a stalk, and you don't need to worry about that. That's normal. when they're outdoors, they can grow blooms, which is really cool. And I have heard that hummingbirds actually really are attracted to the blooms. So let's see. I think that covers everything about aloe vera. They're a really great plant for beginners, indoor gardens, indoor plant collections. You know, it's one you can kind of water and forget about as long as it's getting a lot of bright light. So I hope you've enjoyed this other program on a succulent and getting more into the different varieties, and enjoy National Poetry Month. Thanks, guys.